So with me is Michuki Mwangi of the Internet Society. So we're just going to talk a bit about AfPIF. Obviously, we're here in Lagos. How do we get here, AfPIF in Lagos for the first time? What's led to this?
Well, AfPIF is a journey. It's a journey that's targeting or started back in 2010. And it was inspired by the interest to try and unlock connectivity and interconnection in Africa, meaning that when we started in 2010, the question was, how do we unlock the challenge which we saw at that point in time, where a majority of the traffic was actually leaving the continent. I remember back then there was a study that had been done by the African Union, and they identified we were spending as Africans over $600 million to communicate amongst us. Because all that traffic in terms of was leaving the continent, going to Europe, tromboning, and then coming back. So we needed to improve that and change that. So the question is, how would we go about it? And the way we identified as the best way to go do that was, first, work at the country level and create communities that can actually start discussing interconnection and traffic exchange, keeping traffic local at the national level. But then the next thing was okay, fine, you've done it locally. How would you know, or where would you find a platform where you can actually start talking to your neighbors about interconnection and traffic exchange? So that's how we started the African Peering and Interconnection Program. And we wanted to bring the operators, the content providers, the IXPs, the research and education network, to start having a platform where they can start talking to their neighbors in a neutral space, where they may be competing on the business, but on the technical, they actually collaborate. And coming in to find solutions to cross borders, because cross-border was actually the first and biggest challenge. How do I cross from my country to get to you in a way that's affordable? And the second thing was, what are the barriers? Identifying the barriers and making sure that those barriers are eliminated. Some of them could be policies. Some of them could be the fact that what are the best ways to connect the two countries. For instance, we saw a period where infrastructure was being built, like a country is building a national fiber optic infrastructure, and the next door country is also doing the same, but then they don't have a conversation. So around the synergy. So one will go where the fiber gets to the border point is 60 to 100 kilometers south or north of where the other country is. So then there is a gap. And if there was coordination, it probably would have been aligned. So making sure that there is a platform where everybody is having a conversation around how do we interconnect, how do we keep traffic, and also another point is, how do we start innovating around solutions that use the internet, that get us a step ahead in keeping the content in Africa or creating more content. So the issues of digitalization, government services, and all that needs to thrive. How do we create the infrastructure, hosting infrastructure? What are the opportunities that are needed so that when people start going into that digital ecosystem, the digital revolution or evolution, we already have the framework in place to take or to leverage and benefit from that. So the framework will be basically the infrastructure in place, the policies in place. That way, it makes it easier for you to do e-commerce, e-learning, e-health, anything that the internet can provide. And at the same time becomes more resilient, it becomes more affordable, and it becomes more sustainable. So those are the core things that we needed to look at. And the conversations around AfPIF has always been around that. So at some point we had a conversation by 80-20 by 2020.
I was going to come to that.
Yes, so 80-20 by 2020 was a vision. We say, well, by 2020, can we inspire a few countries to get us to a point where 80% of their traffic is accessible locally, and only 20% is what is being fed from outside retail. So it started like a conversation. It wasn't really scientific, but we thought, if you actually look at the way the business works, at 20%, yes, at 50%, you're now starting to see real benefit and impact. At 80%, you really transform the ecosystem completely. Real benefit to the operators, real benefit to the end users, costs are down, resiliency is up. So could we inspire people to sort of try to aim for that goal? And by the end of that period, 3 countries actually managed to get there.
80-20?
Yes. So
Which
Kenya,
countries? Okay.
South Africa, and Nigeria were among the countries that actually got to 80-20 by 2020.
Okay.
So there's a lot of work that were needed across the other countries. But that didn't mean that was the end of the vision. Then we now recalibrated and say, what's a more realistic vision? What can we review that vision? While the goal is to ultimately get more countries to be at 80-20, let's try and work towards a vision that's more realistic. So we came up with what we call the Internet Resiliency Index, which basically helps countries to understand where they're at, what are the things they do. And on top of that, we built something called the 50-50 vision. So let's at least aim to break that even, 50-50. Because once you get to 50-50, getting to that threshold of 80 is actually much easier. 50-50 is harder to achieve because there is a lot of things that you need to address. And what are those things that you need to address? At policy, at infrastructure, at catalyzing the incentives that are needed to just create that digital ecosystem that's thriving. So if we can actually help many countries identify the things that they need to do, then it's easier. They will be able to get to 50%. Going beyond 50 to 80, that's actually just the snowballing effect. So, and that's how we are looking at it now.
So this obviously took a lot of will, took a lot of collaboration, took a lot of prayers. What were some of the challenges you faced across board, from a regulatory challenge, from an operator challenge, from whatever it was, and how did you resolve them? Or how are you still resolving them if those challenges still exist?
Well, there are a number of challenges. Some countries, the enabling environment. Let's start from the enabling environment at the national level. The enabling environment at national level varies across many countries. We've seen policy environments that make it difficult to build terrestrial infrastructure across a country. I've always used this example, and I'm going to use it because I'm in Nigeria. I use it when I'm outside, that if you're in Abuja and you want to buy capacity from Abuja to Lagos, it is actually cheaper to buy from Lagos to London than it is from Lagos to Abuja. Why? Why? So there are issues about policy, creating an enabling policy environment that would make it possible to open up the market space where there is competition, access to rights of way. That would mean that would enable the operators, multiple operators, to compete and thereby bringing down the cost. Because if you go to other places in Europe, London, Amsterdam, Paris, name any other city in Europe, the cost of a 10 gig or 100 gig is just a couple of thousand. Actually, 10 gig is probably less than $1,000. 100 gig is just about a few $1,000. I forget the exact amount at this point in time. But try and ask for 100 gig between Lagos and Abuja. Fast. It will be hard pressed to get it at 100 gig. It will be hard pressed to get it. Let's go to 10 gig. You will get it, but at what cost?
Because operators would rather just buy 1 gig.
Yes. And even that 1 gig, how much? So the costs are higher. Now, that's just the national level. So now let's try to cross countries. Abuja, Cotonou. Abuja, Accra. What is 100 gig? There's 10 gig. It's quite quite high. Now, there are issues where I would say, oh, it's costly because of the international operators. What is the excuse for the local and cross-border? And we've seen some of them are also policy related. For instance, in a lot of the Commonwealth countries, we have this border point where you have the no man's land, which is 600 meters between two border points. There's always been issues with the policy of
Who owns it?
how do you build across that 600 meters? That's number one. Number two, for you to build terrestrial fiber, you need to have license in country A and country B. Now, what's the cost of a license for an infrastructure operator? Would it make sense that instead of taking a huge amount of money and paying for a license, then taking another huge amount of money to actually build the fiber, all that money went into building the actual infrastructure? It will make it much cheaper. Government will still be able to collect it through taxes, but now they are demanding a huge amount upfront, and then another huge investment. The operator
and they'll still collect the taxes.
And they'll still collect the taxes. So it actually delays. First, it limits. It creates a limit on who can actually build the fiber or the infrastructure, and then delays because now people have to wait until you have the capital, you build it, and then it becomes expensive so that only a few people can afford it at the beginning.
And they become monopolies.
Yes, until eventually, and if you actually think of it, that's why we have very few companies that are rich, that are, I'll say, indigenous, if I could use that word, to Africa, that actually have crossed borders across
so it's easier for a non-African to come in
because they will come
with the war chest,
yes,
and they have the mindset already.
Yes, yes. Yeah. It's not that they are not there that are willing, but the cost is just they will not get local funding to be able to do that. You have to get funding from elsewhere to be able to do that. But if it was easier for me being Kenyan, you being a Nigerian, to build from here to across the neighbors, because A, you can apply for the license, but there is no cost to it. Right? So that means the little money you're able to fundraise, then you can start putting it directly into the investment. Then a lot more operators would have been able to build across borders. So the cost across borders will be cheap. And so think of it, how many countries are neighboring Nigeria?
So how do we resolve this? Because today, so some countries are doing, like Nigeria is doing Project Bridge, sort of building infrastructure. So countries are doing that, but there's a need for collaboration across borders. How can that work? Is ECOWAS or the African Union, how are they really working around this? And because this looks like a problem that has no solution.
No, it does actually have solutions. Right now, it's solving itself through demand. It hasn't gone the proactive way, where they're proactively putting in place an enabling environment where this now just happens. It's sort of being forced by the operators who are trying to request to do this. Yes, exactly. I remember one of our partners was trying to build capacity between, I think it was Accra and Cotonou, I think, or something like that. And the cost they were getting across the borders was just ridiculous. So it was harder to do. So the demand is there because this is an operator who wants to actually build the infrastructure. So now they have to push from that point. But it should always, policy should try to be more proactive in understanding what the issues are and how do we solve for that. So yes, there is a role for ECOWAS, there is a role for WATRA, because those are the two policy, regional policy agencies that are looking at regulation and telecommunications development. So there is a role for them to play. And in enabling that environment, then they also attract the investment. Because once there is an enabling environment, then you are able to attract the investment. So it's more about creating the environment, creating the incentives that will actually lead to attracting that investment. And once that investment comes into the region, then you're just opening up, the market will just open up. There is already pent up in demand. It's just that it's not easy to tap into it because it's harder to get to. Yeah.
That was solid. Thank you so much, Michuki.
Thank you.
There's so much to learn from this.
Yeah, thank you.